Welcome. I'm Dr. Owen Anderson, and you're joining me for my commentary on Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion. I'm doing this study for a couple of reasons. First, in Hume's dialogues, we find the best challenges to belief in God, the best challenges to the knowledge of God. And that is true in the past, present, and future. What I mean by that is past for Hume. Hume, of course, is aware of the challenges that have come up against the knowledge of God. He may believe some of them, but this is not a search for the historical Hume. I'm not doing this to tell us what Hume thought, although many people identify him with the character Philo. I'm simply using this book as a work on its own, whatever else it tells us about the author. So I'll refer to Hume in that sense. This book Hume is aware of the challenges that have come up against the knowledge of God. And then he's aware of the challenges of his own day, the present. And since his time, no new challenges in kind have come up. He deals with all of the challenges in kind that we still see going on today about the knowledge of God. And so if someone is interested in the knowledge of God and wants to spar against the best partner, well, here's the best partner. And there are many books written about Hume, about all of his work or specifically about his challenges here. And yet we find it that there is still need for more response. Something hasn't quite gotten to the central piece of Hume, which is what I propose we do. In order for us to do that, we have to understand the knowledge of God. If we come at this as one of the pieces Hume challenges, we don't understand the knowledge of God either. And so we won't be able to respond to Hume. So it's going to be incumbent on us to understand, how can God be known? And from the beginning, we want to say this: God is known through his works, through general revelation. And the study of general revelation is called natural theology. Natural theology studies general revelation, creation and providence, the light of nature, which is reason, that by which we understand. And we'll actually see a reference in Hume to reason that way, the light of nature. So the light of nature, that by which we understand, and creation and providence reveal God, so that unbelief is without excuse. And yet we'll find many who claim to believe in God coming far short of that, either saying God isn't knowable without the Bible, or everyone knows God due to an inner experience, but in both cases neglecting all of general revelation. Now, that is what the book claims to be about: dialogues concerning natural religion, which means religion without revealed scripture. And the introduction is a letter between two persons, Pamphilus and Hermippus, explaining a dialogue that Pamphilus had heard. And first, beginning with the idea of dialogues at all. This is a dialogue between three fictional characters. Why do dialogues? And Pamphilus points out that in the ancient philosophers, philosophy was taught mostly through dialogues, but it isn't very popular in their day. And that's because philosophers are expected to be clear from the outset and to say, here's my argument. Whereas a dialogue works towards an argument by refining it. You say, here's what I think, and an objection comes up, and you have to respond and refine it. And that happens again, and you respond and refine it. So that dialogical process of challenge and response is how knowledge comes about. You might end up with an argument, and someone could say, look, I just started with that final argument. Well, did you? You haven't yet been challenged. So you still have to go through that that process of challenge and response. So even the philosophers who say, I just start with the final object, haven't really done that, because the final object is one that's been challenged and shown to be sound, shown to be able to answer objections. So in that sense, dialogues aren't systematic, which is what he notes. He says here, it hardly seems natural to present a system in conversation. And that's right in one sense, but they're systematic in another sense, that these systems have to be systematic, which is having been challenged. Put out the argument, someone says, no, I don't agree because of this reason, and you have to have a response to that. And that does end up with a systematic, you can draw out of that a systematic argument. So we're going to see a dialogue here, and that's what we're aiming at. And so that's what he says. There are some subjects that for which uh, dialogue is especially suitable and preferable. And he's going to tell us two of them. Apart from their suitability for the dialogue form, they are utterly unalike, though it will turn out that one big topic includes both. Any point of doctrine that is so obvious that it can hardly be questioned, but at the same time is so important that it deserves to be taught repeatedly, seems to require some such method of handling it. In a dialogue, the novelty of the manner of presentation may make up for the triteness of the subject, and the liveliness of the conversation may reinforce the teaching. So, this is one of the approaches I'm going to take about God. Say, it's just so obvious God exists. You don't need a systematic study of it because everyone already knows it. So, a dialogue helps you look at the form that is being taught in and the repetition and the interest of the liveliness, he says, of the two parties. And then on the other hand, any question of philosophy that is so obscure and uncertain that human reason can't reach a secure conclusion about it seems to lead us naturally into the style of dialogue and conversation. So, two things: so obvious or so obscure. Reasonable men may be allowed to differ on a topic regarding which no one can be reasonably confident. Unclear, can't be known. Which category does God fall into? So obvious everyone knows it, or obscure and unclear? That's when you need opposing views. Now, I offered a third reason at the beginning of why we need dialogues, which was the challenge and response system. I present an argument, someone challenges it. I have to see if I can answer that challenge or not. And that refines the argument to another level. It gets challenged again, and that happens again until it gets to a point where maybe the argument I gave is not sound, or it is sound, and I've silenced the objectors. And so he says, fortunately, all those features are to be found in the subject of natural theology. On the one hand, he says this: what truth is so obvious, so certain, as there exists a God? People in the most ignorant ages have believed this, and the most refined geniuses have worked to produce new proofs and arguments for it. And what truth is so important as this? It is the ground of all our hope, the surest foundation of morality, the firmest support of society, and the only principle that ought ever to be a moment absent from our thoughts, that ought never to be absent from our thoughts and meditations. So everyone knows God. He starts with that idea. Is that true? Let's see how that fares in the challenge and response. But when we dig into this obvious and important truth, we run into obscure questions about the nature of that divine being, his attributes, his decrees, his plan of providence. So both obvious and unclear. And this one is what we'll see today with this paragraph here that I just read summarizes many contemporary philosophers. It's obvious God exists. You might need some arguments to help the doubters, but it's obvious. And yet there's these technicalities, and we can get to know the refined parts of language in Latin or Greek and try to figure out these technicalities about God. So still, he's still describing theologians today. It says men have always disagreed about these matters, and human reason hasn't sufficiently settled them. That's important for us. Humans have been disagreeing about these things concerning God for a long time, and reason apparently hasn't helped us. Well, that assumes we've applied reason to these things. And someone can say, well, how could you say that? Look at all the books, look at all the debates. Okay, so we're reasoning. But this is going to force us to refine our understanding of reason through that challenge and response approach. What do we mean by reason? And have we really applied reason to the knowledge of God? Or have we simply said what he just said a moment ago? Everyone already knows God. He says these topics are so important that we cannot restrain our restless inquiry into them, even though our most accurate researchers have yielded nothing but doubt, uncertainty, and contradiction. It's not clear. There's nothing clear in this area. Sure, everyone believes in God, but once our best researchers, our best minds get into it, we realize we can't know. Knowledge is not possible. And he says, I recently had a chance to observe this, the suitability of natural religion as a theme for dialogue, when I was spending part of the summer season with Cleanthes, as I usually do, and was present in the conversations he had with Philo and Demia, the ones I recently sketched to you. My sketch made you so curious to know more, you said that I can't forbear to give you a more detailed report of their reasonings. The characters of the three men are remarkably different, and this raised your expectations even higher. You contrasted the careful philosophical methods of Cleanthes. We're going to call him the rational empiricist. He relies on empirical observations about the world to formulate an argument about what God must be like, the rational empiricist. And he ends up speaking about God anthropologically, as if anthropomorphically, as if God is like humans but greater. So he thinks of God and terms about God as identical or univocal. When we say something about us, it's the same that we mean about God. And the casual skepticism of Philo, the philosophical skeptic, we'll call him, who really embodies what was just said over here. We can't know. He ends up not denying God exists. We just can't know much or know anything really. And he speaks equivocally. The words we use about God, we don't even know what they mean because God is utterly different than anything we ever experience. So we'll see him and Cleanthes especially going at it. Cleanthes arguing from knowledge or from experience. Philo saying there's nothing in our experience like that. And so our words don't apply to God. And then the rigid, inflexible orthodoxy of Demea, the orthodox believer who speaks analogously about God and yet isn't able to see his assumptions, which both Philo and Cleanthes bring out. And he ends up being a fideist, just asserting his belief, unwilling to go through the dialogue process to question assumptions. But we'll see Cleanthes isn't able to do that either. The rational empiricist can only go so far. And so we're left with the skepticism of Philo. And that's why I said this is a central book. Is it true? Is this correct that we can't know about God? Everyone assumes God. Everyone claims to know something, but when we get into the details, we know nothing. Nothing's clear. That challenge remains for us today. And as I said, most philosophical theologians still go back to what was already considered above here. Everyone knows God. Or arguments given by Cleanthes here, which Philo shows to be unsound. Or the fideism of Demea. You've got to believe something, and this works really well for believers. Well, those aren't answers. Those are just repeating things that were already considered here. We need an answer. We need to show that the knowledge of God from general revelation is possible. Indeed, that's how God is known. And that's what sets up the need for redemption in Scripture, is because we've rejected what is offered in general revelation. So I hope this dialogue will help you refine your understanding about challenges, to see these have not yet been answered and need to be answered, to avoid giving the same old answers that are insufficient, and instead press you to go deeper in your understanding about the study of the knowledge of God in general revelation.